Welcome, everyone, to another Scoop Cyber podcast here in the Carasoft studio in Reston, Virginia. Just a little bit about Scoop Cyber. We're a value-added reseller in the Carasoft ecosystem, focused on emerging and disruptive technologies. And that brings us to our podcast today with Trout Software. Very interesting topic, an important topic about operations or operational technology. As we all know, the threat landscape is increasing exponentially, especially with AI and AI bots and everything in the speed of just the cyber threat. When most people think of operation or of technology and zero trust, we think of laptops, networks, the traditional IT infrastructure. But what about everything else in an industrial environment? The industrial control systems, the cameras that protect the buildings, the sensors, all the systems within the industrial operational environment are under huge threat, yet traditional zero trust models don't really help with that. And that brings us to, why Trout is here, which is purpose-built technology to focus on this problem domain. I'm Steve Krupman, the host today, and again, delighted to be here. And joining us, again, as I mentioned, is Trout Software. And let's go ahead and do some introductions. So if you guys don't mind, saying your name and where you fit into Trout, and then we'll take it away from there. So again, welcome everyone. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your role, a little bit about your background, and then we'll take it from there. So why don't we start with Mark?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having us. So yes, I'm Mark Hoover. Thanks for all of this. I'm in business development here at Trout, and prior to Trout, most of my time was in the military. Majority of that time was in Special Forces, where one of my main roles was in communications, which encompassed secure, communication security and cyber as well. So,
well, first, thank you for your service. We're all appreciative of everything everybody does in the military to protect us, and I think your perspectives are important because you were actually a practitioner in the space, what gives you tremendous insights. Our next guest is Florian. So Florian, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd be happy to be here and chat about all of this today. My background is more in the civil space. I worked for 10 years in data science and security. Especially my last experience was at Google, where I worked on the model of zero trust, on CM systems, and a lot of great technology that lived in the IT world, in the traditional computer world. And we started really Trout to bring these advanced technology, these great solutions to more the real physical world, to the OT environments, to everything you described before. So really excited to talk about this today.
So I always love digging deeper. You left a career at Google to start this, so obviously a passion for this, but you saw a gap in the cyber posture organizations have that's critical to solve. So what were you thinking? Why decide to start a company just focused on that, and sort of what is the mission of Trout?
I think we saw different gaps in the cybersecurity ecosystem. There is a lot of companies that try to tackle, but it's also fast moving, and so you have a lot of different holes. For us, it's been really an iterative process. We started more in the SIM space and tried to reinvent some of the technology there, and it's a really challenging market. And then we started to work with physical companies, with ski resorts in the Alps, for example. So yeah, this is a great station if someone wants to go there. And we started to realize that in the physical world, you have some constraint, you have some lack of maturity that makes it a really interesting and prime segment to focus on. And so over that period of time, that iteration, that fine-tuning, we really identified both OT physical elements as well as the technology we built as the perfect fit. And so that's when we started to accelerate and grow the team and pursue this as fast as we can.
Perfect. I didn't know when we were going to do this, but we do have a Trout. I wanted to show the audience what we're talking about, so if you guys could.
I think it's in this cup, right?
Unless it's at the plant.
This is a demo box or something we use mostly for labs or small environments.
course.
And then we have like larger appliances also so far.
So what we're talking about, and we're going to get into a lot more detail, is a box that goes on the network that now protects your IT infrastructure. So we'll talk in detail what this really does, but I wanted to give everybody an understanding. Implementation times are quick, and just to put it in context, what Trout does, and also they do all the manufacturing, U.S. based, so really cool, and we'll talk more about these. They make a great stocking stuffer for those that are getting ready for the holidays. Okay, so over to you, Mark. Again, define a little more OT and then why these environments are so different. And, the traditional playbooks you have using workflow, whether it's ServiceNow or elsewhere, to protect your network really don't apply perfectly to OT environments. And again, why Trout's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So these environments in the industrial space, they're built for the worker to be, to optimize working. And so it's not necessarily always ideal for setting up a secure network or meeting compliance requirements. These systems have been in place a long time. It's definitely something, that drew me to Trout with this type of, when I started working here, that I could relate to from the military perspective, having to meet some kind of compliance requirements and a less than ideal situation. And a lot of these systems, they have a wide range of lifespans that they are able to keep them functioning for. They might have that workhorse that's been going for a long time. They don't want to get rid of it. They don't want to replace it, but it's still connected, and they might not be able to install security agents on it itself. And so you got to find creative solutions to work around that. And so that's really what you're working with in this type of space, where also there's a cultural aspect that they're maybe not necessarily used to this, the cyber and OT security, especially in like a manufacturing type environment, is somewhat of a recent history type thing. These businesses have been in place for 30 years, family owned, no issues, but now more and more things are connected. They get a new machine and they got to tie it in, or an old machine that they got to keep up. So it's a lot for a business to maintain.
Yeah, so interesting, these, cultural shift of people that may have been doing traditional IT for 30 years in the manufacturing plant. Do you see, some training and enablement, or, so that people appreciate what they're doing? Or is there resistance to doing this? Or, who usually is the champion, or who's, taking the lead and pushing the agenda for OT? So,
Yeah, I think there is both. It depends. You have some companies that are really leaning in this and understanding that this is the next wave of attacks, and if we want to be around in 50 years, in 100 years, we need to tackle that really seriously. So, and the other ones are like, we've been doing this for 20 years. We didn't have a problem, so let's continue as is. So I think the reality is in between or across all of that shade of nuances. Yeah, I think if you look at cybersecurity, at the end of the day, it also needs to be in the background. It doesn't need to be blocking systems, slowing down the team. And so that's where you really have a challenge to make it happen on the shop floor or in OT environment. If people need to go through hoops or bring a laptop to do two-factor authentication when they have gloves and masks and stuff, it's not going to work. So you need to put the solutions that are right for the environment so that they can then deploy them and then scale them. So it's a bit of, yes, the company need to prioritize this, but we also need to have custom solution, and that's why I think we're here today, that fits the environment that requires them.
So Mark, a lot of organizations not really understand how many OT devices that are out there. And just for the audience again, that might be new to this, definitely IT, we're all comfortable with, but give us some examples of devices or workflows of OT that are in an operational environment.
So a lot of times it's pretty common that they won't even be entirely sure what all is connected on their network, or be able to see all those connections, or if they can, they might not know what's what. So that's really one of the first things that we prioritize, is getting that good asset inventory of everything that's on the shop floor. So heightening that network visibility is typically a major obstacle for a lot of these businesses. So, and with our access gate, that's what the first thing we do.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe in terms of definition, really we see as IT everything that's a laptop, phone, or kind of a desktop, and everything else is OT. So that can range from a camera, from like a production machine, from sensors, from HMIs, control systems. So it's everything that is not pretty much a desktop or a phone.
I would
Yeah,
think,
thanks. Better.
you know, the new data centers being driven by AI would be, really need something like Trout with all the
This-
OT they have.
This is a great example because you can think about data centers of like this is just servers that are stacked, and that's typical IT. There is a lot of solution there, but there's a lot of systems around that monitor temperature, that monitor the doors access, the cameras, and all of this is typical OT that doesn't have the same level of security or the same level of controls that you have in the IT space. So this is a great example.
And a lot of those they don't necessarily think of as a potential cyber threat that
Right.
they is an exposure that they have.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit later about the exact threat and the implications if those are compromised. But moving on to zero trust, which is not only a buzzword, it's a necessity, right? And it's even propagating, in my opinion, to everything we do in life. You can't trust a phone call. You can't trust a picture.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I trust you.
We're here, we're real.
But given that zero trust is a priority, and we talked earlier how traditional approaches don't exactly apply to operational technology environments. Talk a little bit about if a key priority of an organization is zero trust, how you help, where you would fit in, and how you fit in with that zero trust architecture.
Yeah. So for anyone that's not familiar, really zero trust is a principle of saying once you're inside a network, you still shouldn't be trusted by default. And that's something that was kind of built at Google around 2008 after they had a cyber attack. And that started to say like the perimeter defense is not enough in our modern world because there's so many connections. And so really you need to build doors, you need protection within your building so that if someone goes in, the capacity of lateral movements or blast radius is managed. And so that's kind of the principle of zero trust. When you apply that to an OT environment, often the way the OT environment have been built is like, okay, it's air-gapped. We have our machines that are talking to each other, but they're in the corner, so there's no risk there. And what we see is that there's more and more connections to the outside world. You do remote maintenance, you push data to the cloud to do some ML and stuff. And so this model of it's air-gapped is just getting pierced and exploding. And so everything that you need to do is now apply the same principle of zero trust, which is how within my OT environment, I still make sure there's those doors and I control who's doing what at what time and really be granular about this. So that's the principle of zero trust, how it's applied on OT. One of the core challenge that you have with traditional solutions is that they are what's called agent-based. It's like you install a small piece of software on all your equipment, and that's how you make encryptions, authentication, and so on. In the OT world, it's impossible. You don't have the hands on the machines, on the system. You kind of bought them like this. You plug them to your network, and you can't really manage the software per se. And so that's why you need a unique methodology, and what we build is kind of the ability to build a bubble around each of your critical systems, what we call enclave. And that's really how we tackle zero trust in this specific OT environment.
Great. And more coming from the government, I would assume this helps government organization meet lots of different mandates and directives from the government. Any examples of things that helps out with?
So CMMC is a huge topic nowadays that is one of those examples of a cultural shift that was essentially no choice. That now it's like, okay, we have to meet these compliance requirements, and it's not just with manufacturing and CMMC. If you're healthcare, you have your HIPAA and requirements and sensitive data. Anywhere that there's sensitive data in any space, there's going to be some level of compliance required.
Yeah, to piggyback on this one, CMMC is a compliance framework that the DoD, DOW has been pushing to all of the defense industrial base, because there was this acknowledgement that kind of Chinese planes were starting to look a lot like the American planes, and so there was probably some leaking happening, and so you had to really raise the bar. And CMMC is how they're looking at the whole entire defense industrial base, which is 300,000 companies. So it's a lot of companies which work with the government and says like now you need to really up your grade and up your game in terms of cybersecurity. And that's kind of like the background on CMMC, which is super interesting, but also happening really fast for a lot of people.
Yeah, that, it's key, certainly to government organizations to be compliant and have that zero trust architecture, and that propagates obviously to the commercial environment. So this is a universal threat that everybody's experiencing, and anything to do with physical plant, physical infrastructure, really needs something like this, or their threat is wide open. So
Yeah.
can we talk about, kind of the threat landscape out there? Are there organized threat actors, foreign entities, where this is part of their mission?
Yeah, so I think if you look about threats, there is a different type of attackers. They're really like the state sponsor, the advanced one, and this is what we discussed a bit before. There is a perception that OT is a great door to gain access to a system, because they're less protected, they're kind of forgotten on the side. And so for those state-sponsored actors, this is usually what they look for because they're a prime entry door. And then there's also the rest of cyber offenders, which are more like hobbyists or just ransomware groups, and they're really going for what door is open, and I'm going to get in there. There was a great example of an attack on a space laboratory in Chile. There is no attacker that would say like this is a prime target that has a lot of money to pay, but it's just like it is open, I get in and I trigger my ransomware attack. So you have that spectrum that look at OT as kind of this is an unprotected door. This is a door that's kind of wide open, and so let's get in there.
I think with that too, part of it is just those folks that have those systems in place not realizing that they are a target, and that's part of the shift that I think is happening.
So let's now focus on how Trout helps with that issue. So talk a little bit about a real example or just a general scenario of a plant. Let's say it's manufacturing a key component in a defense a weapon system. They're under attack. Obviously, there's a critical endeavor going on. We have that all around the world. If anything happens to the manufacturing, it could shut the whole mission down. So they call Trout. We have this problem. Talk about how you would implement this and what are the steps. And from what I understand, it's again, we have a physical box that we need to put on the network. There's not a lot of implementation but walk us through that so the audience gets an understanding of the complexities of doing this and how what are the logical steps that I am that manufacturing plant. What would I need to do, and how would I work with Trout to make that happen?
Yeah. So from I'll give an example from one manufacturing plant, Element Magnetics in upstate New York. They defense industrial base supplier, and a lot of obviously critical infrastructure that goes with that. They've been in business for I think 30 years probably.
A bit more. I think it's 50, second generation. So shout out to them.
Yeah, good people in Elna. And they essentially had to meet a CMMC requirement, and even though they had solid IT people and a good baseline, they couldn't just completely rewire their physical infrastructure, their network. They had secure servers that they needed to maintain access to control CUI, controlled and classified information, and they needed a means to do it without having to rewire their whole network and move machines around, which are massive. You can't do that. And they have some legacy equipment that they need to secure. So we're able to deploy the Trout Access Gate, get them set up and create these secure enclaves or the bubbles that Florian mentioned around each individual device, and set up the access control, network visibility, and all the log collection that they need, to one priority being to just have a good cyber footprint, but also to meet the requirements for CMMC. So that's one example of manufacturing. If you had anything to add
Yeah,
on
I think
that.
even to make it more palatable, like really the device is installed on site, it's connected to with like one Ethernet cable to their existing network, so that can be a firewall, a router, or a switch, and then there's a bit of configuration to create those bubbles. So it's really a lightweight kind of as plug and play as we can. Each factory, each system is a bit different, so that's why you have this configuration that needs to happen. But that's usually done by the IT team or the partner doing their IT. And it's usually it's pretty lightweight. It's a couple of buttons to click and those enclaves to create. But as plug and play as we can is what we're aiming for. One other example that we have is with one of the a Navy that has ships, and thinking about the same kind of dynamic is like those ships were built to be air gapped. They're on the water. They're not connected to the network. But starting to realize now you have unmanned systems that are connected to them, or you're going for maintenance, and so you have people that are gaining access. And so the risk for these extremely expensive boats is also cyber today. And so they need solutions to do that, and they can't rewire, they can't pierce holes in the boat to just like push cables around. So that's another example, kind of more at the high end of the spectrum, about those really, really expensive systems that they need to be secured, because this is just a shift that we have in the market today.
So do I just need one box? Let's say it's a ship, or do I need multiple? You know, how does that work?
So it's usually one appliance. So this is a small appliance for smaller sites, and then there's a larger one for larger sites that have like redundancies and stuff like that. It's also a network equipment. So the same way as like firewall and switches, you're usually looking at an architecture with redundancy, so that if someone fails, there's like failover systems. So it's like between one or two. It depends on kind of the architecture work that we can do. Yeah.
And all this is managed through a very easy to use user interface, and that's so for that manufacturing example, that small IT team that's sitting in a server room that's got plenty of help desk tickets that they're answering, they're not overburdened with this extra work. It makes it much more streamlined for them to do all their controls that they need to. And then same for that bigger, whether it's enterprise or on a Navy vessel, to be able to use that same interface, but with way more systems.
So I think that's key, just to reiterate, the Trout appliances never talk to the outside world.
Yeah.
And the box itself, it could not be compromised, right? It's under the control of the enterprise with regards to even maintaining, firmware upgrades. So there's no risk of the appliance itself being compromised.
There's always a risk in cyber. There can be
Yeah,
someone
I
that walk
should
into
say.
the room and hammer the things down.
It's
So
not a zero risk.
Yeah.
there's less risk, and that's why we built it really for critical infrastructure for defense systems. So it's on premise. There's no cloud connectivity. The hardware is physical. The upgrade is physical upgrade. You have dedicated port for admin. So we build a lot of security in it. Risk zero doesn't exist in cyber, and that's the way we should all think about it. But I think we did a pretty good job to get as close as we can.
Yeah.
So there's an organization that wanted to do a proof of value, a proof of concept. Is that possible with Trout?
It's possible with us and our partners, and that's why we're like in this building also today. So there is really the ability to bring a box on site, connect it to the network, and then start to create these enclaves. One of the key strengths of this technology is that this is not a rip and replace. You don't need to shut your production down and then install a new system. So it's really elegant to let it plug it aside, see the network, create your bubbles, and then start to use them and evaluate if it's a fit. And if it's a fit, then you move from this proof of value to a deployment. And that's usually what we do with every company. And the proof of value can be a couple of weeks. That's usually a good time to create an inventory, create those enclaves, and test the system, or stress test the system, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another key point, that you're not installing any agents or anything on those operational environments. So there's no impact to uptime or
That's correct. Yeah.
their functionality. You're just detecting, threats or mitigating or blocking threats before they even get in.
Exactly. So there's two kind of technology pillar. There is the one that's called software-defined networking, and that's how we allow to have no agents and no rip and replace. And then the second set of technology that we have is proxy security, which is with this bubble, we kind of look at everything that happens or that try to move on the network and allow them or not. And that's really how we allow this level of protection that usually you need an agent for, but we don't need in this case.
And it's still, and by doing that, it's preventing any lateral movement across the network. We talked about that. There's always a risk in cyber, so if somebody could get their hands on something, but in the event that a piece of OT equipment or IT equipment was compromised, that hacker isn't able to move laterally across the network because they're not going to be able to get out of that secure bubble surrounding it.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but perhaps in organizations, their cyber insurance could go down because this makes their posture even that much stronger. So, probably something we should think about as we go forward. Which leads to another question. So it's not emerging technology. This works today, but what is the future for zero trust and operational? I mean, how do you see this progressing? How do you see Trout progressing? What is the ultimate state of protecting OT environments?
Yeah. I think it's there's a lot of work, and I think that's the realization come from this. Is like there's way more connected systems that we think, and they're all an entry door. And the notion of lateral movement that Mark had was like it's perfect. It's like their entry door for the rest of the system. So I think the goal for us is that we can cover a lot of the OT footprints and secure them, and having thousands of sites that are powered by AccessGate, and our technology would be really the goal of what we're trying to do.
And the Department of War has really pushed an initiative of zero trust, and part of where we fit into that puzzle is that zero trust in the cloud has been established for quite some time. It's effective, but they're still on-premise, and a lot of times there's a hybrid situation where they have some cloud security, but they still have these on-premise systems that need it. So that's a major gap that we're trying to
There's
fill
a lot of
here.
work to do there, so enough to do for the next 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, one of the things we do at Scoop Cyber is vet a lot of the solutions. Obviously, you're here with Scoop today because we've seen it in action, it works, and, it can be deployed, and we're also seeing the topic of protecting zero trust for OT increasing every day. It's something, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And I think, working with Trout would be, recommended for any organization. Again, it could be start out with just some education around this topic. We're happy to do lunch and learns, webinars, potentially pilots to move this forward. Very accessible team, as you can see. So before we wrap up, anything we haven't covered or just, closing thoughts from you guys?
I just say that things. I think as a culture and a community in this space, I think this is becoming more common, and people are going to start getting used to it. These things take time to be part of your everyday life, but I definitely think that that's happening, and especially as these pushes for zero trust and compliance become the norm. I think solutions like Trout are going to be more and more relevant.
Yeah, and more relevant because I think we're seeing digitalization and AI kind of like impacting everything.
Yeah.
And so you will have more and more access to the cloud and like different systems that interact with each other, with or without humans in the middle, which is a big like risk and things that can change. So I think this notion of zero trust, building bubbles around your key systems, is definitely present and super exciting to work on. So happy to be here.
That's awesome, guys. So I'd like to thank, everybody out there that listen to this podcast. I know every time I talk to you guys, I learn a lot, and hopefully everybody felt the same. I'd like to thank Carasoft and the whole team here, and thank you guys for a very engaging, interesting conversation. So with that, we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
That's great.